well, thanks for coming. I'm Adrian, so here we have our distinguished negotiating team, and go from Mike Essl and Toby Cumberbatch, we're kind of co-founders, and then Scott Lerman and Mike Borkowsky, who were with us there all the way, and then Zoe Salzman and Andrew Wilson, for those who don't know, the attorneys, and Richard Emery, who's with us, and the founding partner of the law firm, and they've done such a wonderful job for us. So they're here to answer questions as well. And Scott, do you want to do a run through and then take questions? Would that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
We thought it would be helpful to not go through all of the pages of the consent decree and the side preg, but to give you a very quick overview, just to give a context for what's going on and what we think is in the agreement. How many of you have gotten a chance to read through these documents? The only people who can probably explain everything in them are sitting in the front row, because there are a lot of things, I can tell you that as the committee worked on this, where we had to ask questions, which were, why would we agree to this? And we didn't know how we would agree or not agree until we heard what the legal explanation of the term was. So there are things in there like the board can still keep certain kinds of information confidential, and we were looking for openness. So the language there was very specifically crafted, not just on the opinion of the committee, but really driven and led by the legal team. So we're ready to answer those detailed questions, but let's start at the sort of top level. As you know, there's a settlement agreement between the CSCU, the OAG, and Cooper Union, and that's the consent decree. So that is what settles the lawsuit and also lays out the sort of terms of engagement for what's going to happen going forward. It's worth noting that this is an agreement not between everyone in this room and the board of trustees of Cooper Union. Everyone has the right to continue to fight for the things they think are not in this agreement, or if you don't agree with it, you should feel free to express his opinion. So let's just be clear that this is a very narrow legal agreement which settles with the CSCU. You are all free to continue with whatever opinions you have. So just look at this not as something which may not meet all of your expectations, or does meet all your expectations, but something that's going to sort of set the stage hopefully for the future. There's also a document which includes all the findings from the Office of the AG, and that is something that is entirely written by them. It represents what they found in their investigation, what they think is the state of Cooper Union, and it includes a side preg petition, which is literally a petition to the court to allow the trust for the school to be modified. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but there was, as you know, a lawsuit filed in part because the trustees and the administration were interpreting the trust as not requiring the school to be free. That's not the way the committee of the State Cooper Union saw it. It's not the way a lot of the community saw the requirements of the trust. One of the things that this document is meant to do is to bring clarity to what the board should be using as their guide for their actions in the future. So we're asking the court to approve a modification, literally, of the way the school is managed in its trust. It has been signed. Just want to say that we're waiting for the court's approval today, and I don't know what the chances are that the court will say, no, I don't think so. Any view?
There's always a small chance, but we're very hopeful that the court will approve it.
But the parties involved have all signed the agreement. I do think it's important that you're here, and we'll do another session like this for those who couldn't make it today, and we'll follow up with some Q&As online. But this is from the Board of Cooper Union after this agreement was announced. In hindsight, past decisions to address the college's structural deficit may not have turned out as the board planned. We are really interested in working in the most positive way with the board, with Bill May, and the administration. But we're also cognizant that this is a change of mindset, which is very dramatic. And the intent of reaching a legal agreement was to provide a structure which would hopefully ensure that we have a good chance of getting where we need to go. So this is, I don't know, trust but verify, or just verify. We still have concerns that not everybody has made this journey yet with us, and we're serious about moving forward. Just a quick rundown of what we think the documents say in plain English, and guys, just jump in, I'm going to go through them quickly. That Cooper Union's Board of Trustees will work with the community to return Cooper Union to a high-quality, sustainable, tuition-free model as soon as practical. This is obviously the number one requirement for us, was that we acknowledge that if Cooper Union can be free, it must be free. And this agreement is meant to be the beginning of a working relationship to figure out how to do that. There is a special committee of the board, the Committee on Free Education, that will be formed, which is dedicated to the development of a strategic plan to return the school to its traditional tuition-free policy. And we'll answer questions around this, but you'll notice that there's all sorts of language which says we'll attempt to create a plan that, if it's possible, there was a lot of hedging about just declaring the school will be free, in part because some are concerned that the financial situation doesn't allow it, in others perhaps because they don't really care if it's free. From our point of view, though, it is absolutely clear that this set of documents say the school must be free if it can be free. There will be an alignment of the trust and charter of the school through the side-grade petition to reflect the evolution of the institution into its modern form. There's a lot of language as you read through the documents which talk about how some of the things, like the free reading room, which haven't existed for a long time, are actually in the trust as a requirement. The Attorney General's office was very interested in making sure that ambiguity or archaic terms or things that we're not going to be able to do anymore wouldn't be weighing on the board as requirements when none of us thought that they were going to happen in the future. So as you read through these documents, be aware that they're not meant to be the perfect view of what Peter Cooper thought in 1859. They're meant to reflect what we see as the modern incarnation of the school that's developed into, for one thing, meritocracy, which wasn't at the founding. So that's part of what's happened is we're actually modifying the trust document itself so that it reflects the world that we hope will be part of Cooper in the future. There's an expansion of the board, I'm sure you're all aware of this, to include 2 student trustees, additional 2 alumni trustees, faculty and staff representatives. They're called representatives because they can't vote on the board, and in part that is because they are not managers of the school, that they are faculty and they are not in a role of management, which doesn't then undermine the relationship that's being mediated between those employees. Last page of these, and then we can just talk. There is the establishment of the Council of the Associates of Cooper Union, comprised of alumni, student, faculty, trustees. There is an explanation, which I'm not sure is clear to all of you, in documents that says the ability to form a corporate entity called the Associates of Cooper Union, which has the direct right as membership to vote on the removal of trustees and other things, was not going to be acceptable under modern corporate law. But we were very interested as a committee in making sure that the seed was really planted for the Associates of Peter Cooper. So the compromise here is that the board members who are being brought in by election of the alumni, the faculty, and students are really forming a council which has the ability to begin to form the associates in ways they see fit. The board is not required to approve any of the structures. They're also not really able to stop the council from doing what it feels is necessary in the community. But I think this is a sleeper for all of us, to be able to have a group beginning to coalesce and become perhaps more set over the years, which is in Peter Cooper's vision of associates who aid the school and also help to balance the power of the board. Transparent disclosure of board materials, documents, and investment results. This is a huge change, as you know. There will be corrections made to the Cooper Union website of things that are just not true that have been posted in the past. But more important, we will not see the kind of behind-the-scenes leaking of documents so that we can all know about what's happening at the school. Transparency is required and will be part of the way the board and the school operates in the future. There's the formation of a committee to further reform the school's governance. It's the governance committee. There is a feeling, more than a feeling, there's a finding from the AG's office that the governance of the school is weak, and that while this document or a set of documents attempt to address some of the initial structural issues, that we're not done. That there has to be a look at the way the school is literally governed and structured, and there will be an inclusive search committee for the next president. I think what I've heard from the board so far is that they're looking at being more inclusive than the document requires. So that's a really good sign that this was meant to be a base requirement, not to dictate a small number of representatives of the community on that committee. So that's the general gist of what these documents are. I think now if we can open it up, we can ask questions of anybody on the committee, of the attorneys. What do you need to know? What do you want to know more about? We're here to answer any questions you have.
I was wondering what it meant in the press release that the board doesn't agree with the findings of the AG.
We wondered that too.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that? Come on.
I'm going to
say,
we don't know. They haven't been clear about that, to be honest, right?
I guess on the face it means what they're saying. It means that an independent organization that has a lot of credibility in our society came in, investigated, and came to certain conclusions, and they're not agreeing with them. And I don't know whether that reflects well on them in my point of view.
I mean, there's one thing to think about as well when you look at the AG's side trade petition. It basically has two parts. There's a long first section, which is the results of their investigation into the past. And it's a pretty scathing assessment about how the school was treated by the board in the recent past. And then there's a section at the end, which is a little bit more forward-looking. How are we going to change the trust to modernize it and think about what the practical reality is about the future, consistent with Cooper's vision? And so when I saw that line in the press release, I think that it's there saying that, look, we're settling the lawsuit, we're agreeing to the forward changes, but of course we don't necessarily agree with the sour perspective on what we did in the past. So, and we actually challenged them after this round of press came out and talked to them about the importance of embracing the future of Peter Cooper and embracing the future of these documents. And there was an acknowledgement that going forward, there needs to be a common ground. So I think some of what you were seeing in that initial press was a response to sort of covering their own past with respect to these bad things that were said about the past. But I don't think that there's really a big division about going forward.
Presumably everything that the Attorney General wrote is correct.
And more.
Yes. So aren't they, in essence, turning around and accusing the Attorney General of being inconsistent with the truth?
We're staying positive.
Yeah.
The Attorney General did not like that statement in the press release at all. So I think that it reflects exactly what you're saying. I think that the board is a strange concept at this point because it's about to be transformed in the ways that were just described. And so the board expressing certain views at this point, which they have every right to express, one can't tell them not to do it, working with their current lawyers and under their current, as they are currently comprised, is in a transformative period. Obviously, many of the people who were very adverse to what we're trying to do here have left already, and I suspect that others will as well. And I think that the chair probably at some point should be replaced, and that all has to happen as part of this transformation, so that the board, as a concept, in some ways, is kind of meaningless, except at a given point in time. And it's at a future given point in time, the board will be, I hope, very different.
Yeah, I'm comfortable that the board, excuse me, as it's constituted now, is going to change, and actually by the end of next year, it will be very, very different from the way it is, because the chair will be gone and a couple of other people will be gone. So I think I'm more concerned what happens in this year because we still have some vestiges of the old board, but I think we're going to see dramatic changes, and that's really what this is all about.
And then one microcosmic point, and that is that I can imagine that there was a push to have a distance from the Attorney General's findings for personal liability reasons, potentially, that each board member may have felt that might have been, that the Attorney General's findings may have given rise to. And I think that's probably not the case as a practical matter, because there's an awful lot of immunities for board members, but they're doing belt and suspenders, and their lawyers are probably telling them there's no harm in that regard except the publicity which flows from it.
This is going to be hard for a while, the us and them part, and we're going to have to make the transition to the point where the board is us. I can tell you that I don't think I'm revealing anything secret here in that 4 of the 5 people up here who are eligible to potentially be on the board, both as faculty representatives and potentially if the alumni were to elect us, we're all willing to be a part of the board going forward and help to make this happen. So we'd hate to think that the board is somehow our enemy if we're going to literally try to be on the board. So it's a very strange time of transition where we have to figure out how we can make sure the board represents the school that we want it to represent. Other question? Oh, there must be. Okay.
During oral argument, you recall the issue of the 4 corners of the document and what the document did and did not allow you to do specifically with regard to that point of charging tuition. Obviously, going forward, the schools are still going to be allowed to charge tuition. I guess it's part of the side credit. So the question is, was there an evolution of thinking on this issue on your part, or is it just a reinterpretation?
Well, I think there, that was always our stance. In order to create a settlement, I think certain compromises had to be made. They wouldn't have agreed to that. I don't think the Attorney General's office thought that it could instantly make that transition in a financially responsible way for the institution. So I think that was one of the key points. We certainly wanted to drive that as far as we could. But there may be, and if perhaps the attorneys.
Yeah, I think this was a very central point in the litigation from our perspective. How do you read Peter Cooper's trust? What kind of flexibility does the trust give the school to charge tuition, if at all? And our position in the litigation was no flexibility. It has to be free. There's no choice involved. If it can't be free, close the school. It was an extreme position. And the school took basically the polar opposite position. No restriction whatsoever. We can charge tuition whenever we want. And we were really forcing the court to make a decision between 2 polar opposites. And what we have to understand is that while we might have been able to win that sort of diametric battle in the first instance, courts ultimately have the power to change trusts. So if we had won the first battle, the next battle was going to be the school saying, okay, I see the trust requires it to be free. We don't have the money to be free. We have 20 million or 25 million or 26 million deficit. So we don't want to close the school. Let us charge tuition. That's called a side-prey application. It means we want to change the trust to something close to what it is. So it's sort of an almost free school. And the problem for us in an endgame setting is that it would be very hard to convince a court not to allow the school to have some subtle move, okay? So now, with that as the legal backdrop, what do you do in a settlement scenario where you're taking the position it's 100% free and they're taking the position that it's 100% charging, no restriction? What we came up with and what you'll see in the side prey is a very specific set of requirements that say, effectively, if the school should be free, if the school is ever charging tuition, it must be taking active steps to get back to free. And this is better, in our view, than having a requirement that says the school could charge it if it must. right? This is a requirement that if you're ever charging it, you better be getting back to free. And so it sort of creates a situation, it accepts the fact that we're in the situation we are in right now. The school must charge tuition to be open, but it also must be figuring out how you're getting back to free.
How long does that last?
That's forever. So the consent decree, a lot of the bits in the settlement agreement last until December 2024. So the Free Education Committee and some of the specific, the financial monitor and some of those other things are really in place as a mandatory amount until December. Of course, the board could continue them if it wanted to. But the description that I just gave, which we changed, the court, if it approves it today, will change the trust, but that will last. So it's a little bit of an exception, but it also, it keeps the pole star of the school as free tuition.
What the school does get is during the term of the consent decree, as long as it is actually in good faith working against all of the requirements of the consent decree, it's considered to be working in good faith to return to free. So they wanted to make sure, and we did too, that during this period that's happening right now, that there would be real changes and there would be a monitor looking at their behavior, that the AG's office would stay involved in monitoring the situation. So the requirement to attempt to return to free is satisfied as long as they're following the consent decree. So we're in this interim period which is highly monitored, which has certain requirements which are laid out. After that, though, if it hasn't accomplished getting back to free, they're not off the hook.
And one other thing I wanted to clarify, which wasn't immediately clear to me from the documents, maybe it's to other people, is that when you have this situation in agreement, I mean, the Attorney General, without this consent agreement, has difficulty enforcing or getting the board to do things that the office wants it to, because it becomes a complicated litigation, basically, if I understand it. So having this consent agreement in place allows them to quickly and efficiently, and the attorneys can explain this better, to bring up any violations of this agreement quickly and effectively and get them resolved by the court in a limited time frame. And perhaps you can speak to that a little, because it's not really open in agreement.
Yeah, the phrase consent decree might be familiar to some of you, because this is one of the ways in which the Attorney General keeps control over entities that they've investigated and determined that there was problem and they want to keep oversight over. It's a little bit like the school's on probation for that period. And so what the school has done is agreed to certain changes as an alternative to the AG actually bringing a case and forcing the school to do some of these things. And because it's in the form of a settlement or a consent decree, the AG was able to get some concessions that would be unusual. The judge in this case would not likely have entered a monitor, for example. But that's something that having a financial monitor in place and some of the other things that we have in the agreement are the result of the fact that this is entered into on consent as sort of like a probationary period.
The financial monitor, who is that? Where do they come from? It's in the consent decree, it talks about the AG expeditiously commence a request for proposal process.
Right, and I understand that's kind of a formal process that's required by the Attorney General's office to make sure it's a fair and open process so that different people can apply to it. And from that, they're going to ask each side to sort of rank their opinions, but the decision is the Attorney General's in terms of who to actually select for it.
So it would be an individual?
Yeah.
Group, or?
No, an individual.
Yeah, an individual. So, I mean, he may be working for a company. That's a different story, but yeah, it's an individual.
And so this person wouldn't necessarily change based on, like changes in the Attorney General's office, et cetera, or they're not necessarily tied to the office?
No,
the hope is they would stick with us through anything like that. Yeah.
But behind the consent decree is the implicit understanding that at any time anybody feels that the school is not making a good faith to return to free, we can call the Attorney General, and if that office thinks that we have a fair complaint, they will come along and rectify.
And by the way, just along the lines of enforcement, as you know, Peter Cooper had originally set up the associates to, on a vote, be able to remove trustees. Now that the council of the associates is part of the board and are the representatives really of the community, as board members, any board member has standing with the court. So what we've really got is the ability to know that if this is violated, we have the AG's office, we have a financial monitor, and we will have people on the board who as trustees have standing in the Supreme Court. And what that means is it hasn't been ruled on. Part of what the case was that was made by CSCU was that those who petitioned the court had standing to actually sue the school. There hasn't been a ruling on that yet. We now know that with the representation we have on the board as trustees, they do have standing if they think there's something amiss in the board that requires a legal remedy. So that's a big deal too.
Good question.
Well, I have a question. I guess it's not really positive about looking forward, just sort of looking back. If anyone's going to be held accountable, or if there are any criminal charges, if they will just, you know, if you can speak a little bit to that. Because I read about like Teresa Dahlberg and the computer science program, you know, trying to set up this institute or to do the funding for this new building. So is that just, you know, whitewashed?
It's a very good question, and we're trying to get you know, more of a response to that from the Attorney General's office. You know, what we gathered was that, you know, there's a certain amount of effort, and they have to decide whether or not they think pursuing that would be positive for the school and in an overall way in terms of how difficult it is to do and what the potential gains are from it. So that there's some balance there. I don't know. You know, I'm sure it's not a trivial legal matter.
I can say that I think that being realistic and straightforward about this, the chances of them doing anything are very, very small. And I wouldn't hold out much hope for that, as much as there are people who should be held accountable for this past period of economic decisions, regrettable, to say the least, possibly worse than that. And the reason is that they are essentially getting a pass, like the banks, like we've seen in the economic crisis of 2008, in order to move forward with a hopefully better environment where tuition in the future can be eliminated. I would also say, just to be very realistic, because I think it's important to convey the realism and the vulnerabilities and the deficiencies in this agreement. That is a pragmatic agreement giving all of us hope that we're going to achieve the goal. There are a couple, that is that there's obviously a delay period. And also there is a very slippery standard that allows a board that's hostile to free tuition, or no tuition, to try and undermine the goal of no tuition by saying that educational standards can't be met without tuition. What does educational standards mean? And maintaining the educational quality of Cooper. We all want that to happen, obviously. We don't want it diluted, but at the same time, those definitions become very slippery. And that's a very worrisome thing. And that's why it's important that we have a lot of board people to hold the feet to the fire of the board when they try and, if they try, to characterize going forward the need for tuition as part of keeping quality intact. So there are problems, there are difficulties here. That's why the procedures are in fact probably as important as the substance. The fact that the board is going to be comprised of people that we know will not compromise the principles and goals of this entire effort, and the fact that there's a monitor, and the fact that the AG is, I think, genuinely cares about implementing this in a way that does not undermine the original Peter Cooper vision as conveyed by this, I pray. So unless I've said something wrong, it does seem to me that it's important to convey that there are a number of doors through which the board might be able to go without, but that we have a lot of methods to prevent them from going in that direction if they're trying to undermine the intentions, which they say they're going to follow, but we have to be suspicious.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of work ahead, a lot of vigilance required, moving ahead from the entire community, and we're hopeful. The community has arisen to support this effort, and in many other ways, and before us, and after us, and during, and with the Free Cooper Union, obviously, and Friends of Cooper Union. So, the continued vigilance by everyone involved is going to be very important.
It's more than vigilance. I mean, this is not over. I mean, let's be really clear. The mechanism that exists here is that when the Free Education Committee is formed, it's going to make some interim reports. And the board isn't required to vote up and down on a strategy until 2018. So from our perspective, we would like to see hard work done by the community, the administration, and the board to figure out how to get back to free much sooner than that and to take that seriously. That's not going to happen if we all turn away and say it's taken care of. We are going to have to actively work and think about how the school can cut its expenses, increase revenues which are not based on tuition, and find a way forward which is good for the school. So we really, I think it's good you're saying this, because we couldn't write a standard which is we won't break the school, but we're going to be free. So we are the standard, the community, and it paying attention and being part of this. We're actually the standard that we trust at this point.
And regarding the education committee, are they, do they need to find a sustainable free education model before we can return free, or is it the most immediate model?
You said the word sustainable, and a shudder goes down our spine. And maybe you guys, I'll just do a quick answer. I think there's been a mistake that's been made by the board in the past, which is to assume that the community is full of starry-eyed people who have no clue about the way the world works. And nothing could be further from the truth. There are Cooper graduates, there are people who care about the school and the community who are very sophisticated. The intent is to come up with a sound plan which will keep the school strong, which will continue to have a school which meets the core mission and ideals of the school, and we want both, and that's our standard. As far as proving that we can stay fiscally sound for 100 years using the Huron Group's data on inflation and cost of living, that's only one small part of the standard I think we're going to have. So that's to your point, it's a great question. Sustainable is what we decide is best for the school, what we decide, and I mean we as the community, the whole community, and we believe will not put the school at risk. Their plan put the school at greater risk than it's ever been in the past. It was not a sustainable plan.
Right, and that's one of the things that I think needs to be raised when we're creating a plan. Well, what's the alternative, and what are the risks inherent in that? Because that's something they've been giving very short shrift to. That needs to be explained to the community and really driven down into it.
And if anyone doesn't know, that's Claire Climate. She's one of the original petitioners.
Question about it.
So you were kind of talking about it.
Oh, easy.
I'm just kind of wondering, I don't think it's really fair to ask, like, what's the real timeline of administering free, and it's like a realistic question. So do we have, like, goals or markers that Cooper will try to attain as they move towards free tuition? So are there set standards that we're going to try to uphold?
Yeah, and that's really the work of the Free Tuition Committee to try and to create that and to quantify that. It's not something that we could do within the scope of these discussions and negotiations. We'd never agree to that, but we're creating the mechanism for them to do that, and there will be interim reports. We talked about this final, 2018, where they have to respond to free tuition plan, but every year, I believe starting in January 2016, there'll be an interim report that they do need to respond to, but it's not the final plan. So absolutely, but it creates the mechanism for that to happen. I think that's very important to have metrics so you can see exactly where we are, where we're going, what we need to do to get there, and we haven't had that. Yeah.
And the Free Education Committee will have complete access to the financial data of Cooper Union. In the documents, it makes sure that they have that access, so it can't be, nothing can be hidden this time.
And it's 2/3 alumni, and it's run by someone who's an elected alum. So it was one of the focuses of the committee was we really wanted to make sure that group would be totally dedicated to answering your question and answering it as soon as it is actually possible to do.
And if the Free Education Committee presents a plan before 2018 that is viable and the financial monitor says is viable, there's nothing stopping any sitting board member for calling for a vote on that plan.
Just
Oh, is it? Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for
Just to can I quickly add to that? The last time we met Bill May, he gave us the impression that for the first time since he's been here, he thinks he understands the money.
Right.
And that hasn't been apparently the case for a long time.
What happens to the committee decision for reunion now that there's a settlement?
We get shot at dawn.
That's a really good question. I mean, our feeling is we keep watching, and if we have to keep fighting, we keep fighting.
Right, exactly. I mean, we kind of have to see how things develop, and then determine, well, how would it be most effective to address the problems? We would love to move forward in a supportive fashion and see that everything's moving on the right path and be supportive of that, but we have no guarantee of what will happen. So, we're trust but verify. Yes.
Anybody else?
The Attorney General, although he said he wasn't going to go after any parties in particular, he did strongly suggest about, I think, coming around and saying so that the MetLife loan was predatory.
Sure.
Are there any legal mechanisms at all that can be used to revisit that agreement?
Do we turn that one right over to the attorneys? I mean, I can say it's difficult. From my understanding, there's statute of limitations issues. This happened about 10 years ago, and this is statute of about 6 years, and so there are complications with doing that. And we did ask about this and tried to explore it and see, well, what could be done about that. There may be something still uncovered, and there are other ideas, and we keep asking about it and looking into it. I mean, I don't know if attorneys want to chime in on that, or.
I think there's two things to keep in mind. Specifically with respect to MetLife, I think Adrian gave a good summary. I think there's complications. I think that maybe as part of the Free Education Committee's work, maybe that would be or the financial monitor, like going back to MetLife and having conversations about that loan could be a dimension of that kind of advocacy going forward. But in terms of holding either MetLife or others accountable for what you see in the narrative, I think it's important to understand that there is a holding accountable insofar as all of what you're getting in the consent decree. The way the AG works in a setting like this is that there's a detailed investigation that happens. A lot of information is unearthed about in a case like this, misconduct in the past, and that is presented to the school with a choice. Either we hold you accountable for this in court and things go really south for you fast, that's door number one, or door number two is a series of reforms where you pledge to the community to clean up your act yourself on consent. And the consent decree is typically more than you would get if you fought them for it. but you don't have the schadenfreude of actually punishing the school. Okay, and so that's the trade-off that you have here. It's not that the school isn't being held accountable, or that MetLife isn't being held accountable, or that the various past trustees aren't being held accountable. That they've made a choice, which is actually, in our view, better for the school, which is they've endorsed the consent decree, which gives you the platform for getting the school back to a good place in exchange for not just chasing them and punishing them.
And let me I just want to
Not
follow
just a
this.
question of punishment, there's a huge amount of revenue there. It's not like going after George Campbell.
Right, and that's what I want to.
That's a total, I mean, so returning then to the specific question of MetLife is how that fits into all of this. There are legal impediments like statute of limitations and the fact that there's a contract in place and other issues which would make pursuing them difficult, but if people are interested in doing that, then certainly there's nothing in these documents that prevents them from doing it. I mean, one could review the findings and try to come up with other theories about how you might advance the position of the school using the findings.
Yeah, I just want to, let me just follow up one more to his question. Let's be clear, at no point did the Office of the AG say to us, so would you like us to pursue a criminal case against X, or would you like Y? There's been no trade-off made by the committee around anyone's culpability, about any penalties to anyone. So while we are with you with the notion that people should be held accountable, the only accountability that we could negotiate was to getting this agreement to give us a structure to get back to free. So just to be clear, we had no discussions which were, should we let life off the hook? We said the same thing as you did. That being said, to Andrew's point, there is nothing keeping the community or any party who reads the findings of the AG's office to ask the AG's office, can they be more aggressive in pursuing it, to thinking about how MetLife could be approached to say, do you want to be a good community member and get rid of, for instance, the prepayment penalty on this loan? So those doors are still open. They were not negotiated away in this process.
Just one final question of them, but then I gather you obviously, you and your legal team thought long and hard about this, and that you came to the conclusion that you're unlikely to be successful, right?
This was not a negotiation with MetLife. That's what I'm saying is successful in getting MetLife.
No, you thought about whether or not to go after MetLife, and you decided it would not be worth it.
No, I'm saying that it wasn't in the scope of this negotiation.
Right.
So it just had nothing to do with this negotiation. We agree with you that if there's an opportunity to have MetLife be a good citizen or be forced to be a good citizen, the community is open to doing that. We were not negotiating with MetLife.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, when we talked about accountability, John's short answer was it would cost too much and take too long. And I think his response to the MetLife agreement was it's extremely well written.
Right, but that's the AG's office opinion about whether they will go after them. The Committee to Save Cooper Union was never a party or asked to opine on whether we should be litigating with MetLife. We had no standing with MetLife.
Right. That would be something that the board would have to take up. Yeah.
We would encourage any action which can help to right some of those fiscal wrongs.
I will join any action that will help right any of those fiscal wrongs, if I'm allowed to. Anyway.
We just weren't doing that.
Could I ask you what you think of the proposition with MetLife? Or you haven't thought about it much either?
Who?
I mean, the question is a little bit too abstract about what to do about MetLife. I mean, I think, it's a complicated legal question about whether you could unwind a loan that was undertaken years ago and what the basis of that would be. And so I think it's what you see in the AG's report is a lot of information which could lead you to other places, but I don't think you have enough in that report to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's more or less been expressed, but procedurally, if the conflicts of interest, if the investigation discovered conflicts of interest that would be considered criminal, that in principle would be the AG's responsibility. Right?
Yep.
I mean, it wouldn't be Cooper unions, and it wouldn't be, as the neighbors say, Cooper unions. It would be none of these parties, right? And
Yes.
in principle, if that were the case, the AG would be obligated to go after them. You wouldn't have a choice to say.
I think if they, yeah.
After this criminal.
Right. If they had the evidence there to show that there's criminal activity, I don't see how they could not do that. But in at least their investigation, they didn't unearth that kind of evidence of criminal activity that would essentially force them to do that.
Right. It's completely autonomous.
Insufficient. Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
And,
Right.
and remember, one of the fears with this lawsuit is that the court would say it's just about business judgment, which is a really difficult thing to prosecute people for making decisions that are bad decisions, that there's a certain leeway you get. So to your point, if the AG had found criminal behavior, we assume they would be pursuing that.
And I guess another point that Professor Gersten had raised in the conversation earlier is that there's sort of the issue, and one of the issues that we're thinking about going forward in this is that from the outside of the Cooper Union community, this sort of creates a very different picture and kind of creates clarity, for someone who's reviewing the situation from the outside. Otherwise, they see, a lawsuit with the alumni and the administration. They don't know what's going on. Here, the Attorney General's weighed in, explained what happened, and hopefully, it's some sort of a clean slate that people from outside Cooper Union might be more willing to approach and embrace the institution if they support its ideals and be able to support it in a way that they haven't before.
The most critical thing in the whole story is that the institution never was given the opportunity to be sued. Because the same week that the discussion of the financial crisis came with that, the fact that, the leadership didn't really believe in the mission.
Yep.
Right? People really mean it and all this nonsense. And so they closed the door on supporting the place at the exact instant they announced it needed support. And now, 4 years later, we've got the first instant where we can begin to build leadership that supports the mission, supports the vision, and is saying, now come support us. So the credibility issue is gigantic.
Yeah.
It ultimately is a gigantic credibility issue, which is why any hint of a kind of lurking immunity is a problem. But I think we have to assume the AG's hands are tied. Yep. If there were criminal activity, it doesn't have the right to back away from that.
Right.
It's illegal.
Right. Or if additional evidence surfaces for that, for whatever reason, there's nothing in here that precludes that.
And by the way, a personal opinion, John Oleski, who was the assistant AG who negotiated this, we were really impressed by him. And more importantly, I can give you a personal opinion, he understood the mission of the school and cared about it. So that was very encouraging to not just have someone looking at this legally, but looking at it from the intent of a trust set up by Peter Cooper.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of building on David's point a little bit, but we talked about the board being in a transitional period. So the board a year from now might not look that much like the board as it stands now, but if this is an 8-year or 10-year kind of plan to get Cooper back to free, how are things going to work with the incoming student bodies that continue to pay, the admissions department, which has to put out some kind of message? Is the sense that there's going to be a lot of prefigurative language about Cooper charging right now but returning to free? Or, it seems like a really extended period.
That's a really good question. I've considered this question and I'm like, I come up a little blank, to be honest. But I'm sure you have a better answer than I do. But I imagine once we have people on the board and students on the board, and that is going to be one of the questions, is how do we frame this going forward for new students?
Yeah. I will say it was, and I think it was Victoria we spoke to early on with the class that had come in was paying tuition, about how some of them actually came because they wanted to be here to return Cooper to be free. So, which was just incredible to hear. There is an opportunity, even during the transition period, which I certainly hope will not be 8 to 10 years, where we can attract students who not only think this is the right place to be, but want to be part of the effort to create something for the future of other students. And that is incredibly motivating. I will tell you, I spoke to Bill May this morning, and one of the things we talked about is I had gone back years ago to Jamshed and said, I'd like to help the school to think through the nature of what it's doing and what it's going to say about how it's going to get back to free, why this is a necessary transition if it's necessary. And he ignored that. Bill May, on the other hand, said, yeah, we need to talk about that. So it's got to be a topic for the board of who are we, what do we stand for, and how do we talk about the nature of the journey we're going on. I hope that can be an incredibly inspiring story, but we better figure that out very soon, because if not, we're just leaving things as we have ambiguous. And I don't see any ambiguity here. We need to be committed as a community to making Cooper free. We should say we're going to get there despite anyone who is doubtful about it. And you should be part of this, but we're not guaranteeing it's going to be next year.
They'll have to frame it. We'll have to get that conversation framed, even just to find a new president. So,
when is the committee on free going to be formed? Because I'm doing math, and you're saying there's going to be 2/3 elected alumni trustees, and we don't really have enough currently on there right now. We're going to get 2 more in December, another one in June, another one. We've got a bunch of people who've been on there for a while that's phasing out.
But I think the 2/3
Can
might
it grow over time? I mean, how big is the committee and when is it being formed?
I don't think there was any definite language on that. But I think the 2/3 might include a student as well, from my recollection. So it's like students and alumni trustees. So I guess there's a little bit extra help. But yeah, I think we definitely need the support of additional alumni trustees who really believe in this mission and are willing to work to make it happen. It's very
The committee has to be formed within 60 days of today if the court approves the settlement today. So within 2 months, the committee will.
Soon.
Or sooner.
Because 2 months from today is, we won't even have Peter Castle to work on it. So how are they going to put it on?
Guess they're going to have to work that out. By the way, Carl, you sound just like us in that you're asking for more representation of the board, not just to shift power, but because there's work to do. So remember, the board is not constrained from doing more. I actually suggested to Bill May that he tell the board at their next meeting that they should appoint him to the board tomorrow, rather than wait for some election. There's nothing keeping the board from doing as much as it can. So I hope we'll all pressure them to do that. Victoria?
So I understood that we've been talking with Jess, and she's the new student trustee, Brad has become the student trustee, and actually she brought up at the last meeting of the students that the board was going to be moving forward with forming that committee tomorrow. So even that does maybe pair up with your question as to who's on the board now that they would be able to move forward with making that committee so soon without really resulting in the rest of us. So I think, keeping track of when the board's meeting and what they're meeting about should be a top priority for us. Especially since we do have Jess on the board, and she's able to speak a little bit more openly about what's going on. We try to get the agenda points in mind to see what she can bring back to us from those meetings. But I know personally none of the students or myself knew that was something that they were going to do tomorrow.
Right. I think they've already, the chair, I believe, is Richard Tan, or at least, Robert Tan. So that's their first step, and then I don't know if they've filled out the membership, but yeah, they're and I don't think that there's nothing limiting that committee from reaching out to the community for additional help and involvement, and we would hope they will do so.
But just so you know, in the future, we won't have to find out about it. The board's going to be required to disclose what's going on. And I do think that, from what I understood from Bill May, is they're going to be trying to take care of a lot of the things required by the consent decree tomorrow. So I wouldn't take it as an ominous sign. I think setting up a committee means they're changing the bylaws, they're trying to do the things required of them. But we'll know because they're going to be required to report what they're doing. What a change, right?
Is the board going to continue meeting off-site?
That's a good question.
Good question.
Is it strawberry shops on?
We hope not, but.
They still do.
Yeah.
We forgot to include that in the consent decree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know.
I mean, we hope that as part of the good faith, they will automatically come back here.
Yeah, ever since that transcript showed up in The Voice, they stopped meeting here. So,
But ostensibly, now there's
yeah,
many alumni, many students on the board, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason there's no litigation, not a question for you guys, obviously.
well, there's a meeting with trustees here on the 18th, right?
Yeah.
So I would, everybody who's here now should come to the meeting on the 18th and ask the trustees directly if they're going to be meeting on campus or not. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we have to take right to the board, I think.
And by the way, just so everybody knows, we're recording this session for Q&A. Just want to, we're fully transparent, so there will be a transcript or question and Q&A or tapes floating around. Everything's been said.
There's a meeting here, you mean here?
Yeah.
This is going to be on the 18th, Friday. The members of the search committee are going to come here in the evening to meet with people and talk about it, organized through the NONSTOP Cooper space. That's on the presidential search committee. So that's going to be potentially Richard Linzer, Kevin Slavin, Jess Marshall, Robert Pan.
Thank you for hosting that, by the way.
Yeah.
I think it's obvious, but
Oh,
it's,
sorry. I guess
sorry.
along similar lines since we're asking about representation of the board. Because I know that there are also now spots open for full-time, part-time, and staff members. I'm just wondering if any of you have heard anything about what the procedures would be like for
In a meeting we had with Bill, he casually mentioned that the board was working on those procedures.
Okay.
And that's all I know officially about what's going on in terms of those positions. I did ask John Oleski when we had the meeting about the agreement, I asked if, let's say hypothetically, the School of Art voted me as the rep to the board and the board rejected me, what would that mean? And he said, well, that would mean they were acting in bad faith and you should give me a call. So I'm not exactly sure how they're going to set up those structures, but we did get a preview of what might happen if they don't do them in an open and honest way. So
certainly, it certainly seems like a complicated.
Yeah.
Month's election, what
Exactly.
How well defined are the constituencies?
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Oh.
I just want to say thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
And
yeah, thanks for all the support.
Yeah.
Really. And
That's a giant work.
thank you.
The person we really need to thank is Adrian.
He's the mastermind.
Yeah, I couldn't have done it without these guys and team effort, you know.
I just want to thank Free Cooper Union, all the students who occupied, Casey, Vic, Joe, Harrison, all you crazies. You really helped me understand why we should fight. So thank you for that.
We'll hang out for a little while if anybody has any questions they like asking in a big group.
And thanks for hosting this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.